what is language bias? What is the highest possible quality research? What is the highest possible quality research evidence, as it were? One of the things what we learned on the research masters in research in health and social care program I was enrolled onto and attending at the University of Greenwich, about the grading of evidence. And there are various ways. There's grade 1, 2, 3, 4, or A, B, C, D, whatever. The difference between those things is that they represent somehow a measurement, a quantification of the quality of the evidence available to aid professionals to be able to carry out what is mandated onto them. That's called evidence-based practice. So they don't have to go back to every single detail and check every single bit of evidence, whether it's a good quality or not. Not to mention that actually does require quite a bit of training and practice also, and the most difficult part to keep an open mind. And what we know is that double-blind randomized controlled trials are called the hardest, as it were, scientific evidence. The only problem is with those things that they only measure what we can at present measure. So we cannot manage the studies, the unmeasurable, the unknown, or the undiscovered, yet undiscovered elements of or physiology or even anatomy. But apart from that, the second step in that, when someone does what we call a meta-analysis of primary research, that's called secondary research, it is friggin' difficult. For one reason, because one has to find all the bits of research that is relevant to that particular subject or to that particular area. That's one thing, which is huge amount, of course. On the other hand, because it's very labor intensive, and also like meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, that's a huge task and requires a team. So it's super labor intensive, and the person hardly who does or who gets involved with it, that's one of the reasons why usually more than one person does it, just like teams doing it. It's incredibly unsatisfying because the person does not get the credit for publishing something original, because basically they're summarizing the information from others' data, but they have to go through, like with the comb, very, very thoroughly in every bit of detail, check every bit of detail whether it was sufficient enough, have a list of criteria for inclusion and then exclusion as well. So it's quite tough. One of the things I tend to ask when I see this so-called hard evidence, because that's the term for it, but it's far from hard in a sense, because there's no competition. It's just most of the time, well, vast majority of the time, it's something quantifiable. Well, shall we say something quantified, regardless whether that was quantifiable or not. It's quantified. Let's stick with that one for ease of this discussion or ease of this thinking. So my first question tends to be on such occasions, okay, so when the studies were included, what were the languages in which the studies were written, produced, and published? And they usually get surprised that I'm asking in plural, because they think about singular. English, often the answer. And that's what we call the language bias. And the language bias is important because the language we use not only forms how we think, but also how we think forms the language we use. And amongst many other things, the English, for instance, likes using the passive structures, which are inherently negative. And now we've got a bit of a scientific evidence also into this that actually narrows one's mindset. Just the language. In Hungarian, instead of the passives, we tend to use sorts of the choice of words we use seem to have some kind of relation to the emotional charge these words have. And not only I mean the two words for the red, vörös, piros, but if you say something like danger, even in English, the sounds in it, the actually produced sounds are similarly on the higher pitch or higher frequency ones, veszély in Hungarian. So those things are important, but there is a language bias. And what I think, my view on this, that us bilinguals who've got a really good command of a learned second language and their own mother tongue, or have they bilingual in terms of first language, so they have two first languages, because that does happen also. We are the ones who need to get trained into this, how to evaluate multilingual research, even hard evidence, how to understand those words that were written down, because every word every sentence have three different layers in terms of communication. One of them is nothing else but the pragmatical meaning of the word. What it in practice means, like Richard is walking. What does it mean? I'm just walking back and forth in here on this pier. That's what we can say, yeah? But it has also a semantic meaning. Lots of things coming to it. All the memories, for instance, about Richard, how Richard walks, how Richard I don't know, limps, for instance, as I'm doing right now, because my hips are quite hurting at this point in time. So I will be in soon for a double hip replacement, but I'm too young for it, as we know. And just as arthrosis scares me, I digressed, I'm sorry. And of course, there is, so there is a pragmatic meaning, there is a semantic meaning, and there has to be a syntax. This is what we learn at school. How we put together sentences, how we put together not only the sounds, but the grammatical structure of the sentences. And we learn from home initially, but then it gets corrected or not at school or during schooling. And as we climb up on the ladder of education, we most likely to be learning more and more and more from each other, from formative and very determining educators, teachers, role models. So this is the message for this morning.